First, you could introduce yourself and the institution we are in, and what you're doing.
Well, I'm Denis Volkov. I work as sociologist and head of development department in Lewada-Center, and Lewada-Center has a rather long history, more than 25 years, and the team was formed as in in 1987. And the first director was academician Tatiana Zaslavskaya, until I think 1992, and then Yuri Lewada, one of the first professors of sociology in Soviet Union.
In your opinion, what is the Russian youth about, and the young people? What is a big topic in their life?
Well, I think it all depends upon what type of settlement. I mean, if it's a big city like Moscow, like St. Petersburg, I don't think it will be much different from Frankfurt, Berlin, Poland, Warsaw. I mean, quite the same. I mean, because it's dynamic economy, many opportunities. But in this, I mean, younger people in big cities are more open to the world. I mean, have more experience of going abroad, speaking foreign language, maybe 3 times more often than population in general. But and so on, and even more tolerant for LGBT, which is, I would say, rather hard issue here in Russia. But it does not translate into everything. I mean, they are not that tolerant towards migrants, for example, and the xenophobia towards migrants is just the same as in population in general. And I think that, and speaking about internet, social networks, they are, of course, more frequent users of social networks, internet, maybe almost, I think, 80 to 90% of young people are in the social networks or on the internet. But at the same time, they are more supportive of the government, of the politics, and I would explain it like they do not have much interest in what's going on. I mean, until maybe 25 something. Well, just to give some number. I mean, the interest to politics, to what's going on, it's just arise if it arises just when people become independent, more just read something and so on, and have to somehow understand how to orient in the world and so on. But I mean, so we have very interesting situation that at the same time younger people are more open, potentially more open to the world. At the same time, they're supportive of the government, supportive of the annexation of Crimea, supportive of this conflict with the West. And so I would explain it like that: they are more influenced by propaganda, by state media, less critical about it, know much less about history, Soviet history. 1/3, I think, do not know much about, maybe even almost nothing at all about Stalin's repression and so on. So it's rather different picture. But at the same time, people, younger people in small, outside of big cities, they do not have much opportunity. There is alcohol abuse. There is almost no future, no opportunities, and it somehow explains, for example, why the support for serving in army I mean, just not on contract, but a draft, yeah, a draft that it is supported just in the outside the big cities, because it's one of the almost one of few social lifts that they can use in these small cities and so on. So, and if we would look for for people who are the most supportive of the regime, it's young people in rural areas, less critical, do not have much access to different sources of information, sources of news, and so I would say that speaking about internet and social networks, when people are young, they go to the social networks and internet just for fun, for films, for music, for chatting with friends, not for finding out what's going on in the country and outside of it. So 90% are getting their news from TV. And so to say, I can say that it's state-run television. First of all, channels like Dost, for example, have maybe audience of 5%, no more. I mean, independent, you see that internet here is kind of alternative, which is growing. But if we look at this, maybe now it's not 24, but 30% of those who get news from internet. But if we look at the sources of these news, it's half of them are getting it from news aggregators. But again, with the war in Ukraine, it was just suppressed by the government. It has the audience of about 20% of Muscovites, I think, and 10% in Russia, which is more even than Dost, for example. But it's now hardly controlled by the government and do not provide much alternative. And the sources like newspapers and websites of these newspapers, like Ведомости, like Новая газета, Независимая газета, maybe 2%, 3%. I think one of the biggest alternative sources is RBK now, which is owned by Prokhorov, but the team is formed by people who worked in Ведомости, who worked in Lenta.ru, Gazeta.ru, when they were independent. And overall penetration of independent media, news agenda is about I think 30% in the country. I mean, if we take newspapers, radio stations, TV, independent, it's about 30%. But those who follow several sources of independent sources of information, it's only 10%. In Moscow, it's about 60 and 30. So you see that the penetration in big cities is pretty big, but it's only secondary source and the main source of TV. And it is interesting that if you look at sources of information in different questions, we have different questions about it, that half of population dependent almost only on TV, just do not read newspapers, not listen to radio, do not read on the internet, just half of population dependent on TV. And maybe I can just have you give you an idea that we can say about three periods or trends in Russian media. One is again, because media, they do not they exist not in vacuum but in political context. And first trend is I would say some when state certain bureaucracy trying to rebuild their influence, and it started before Putin, But with the beginning of his first year as president, there were major changes when Enter and Channel 1 were just put under state control. Oligarchs were expelled, and they became state channels, or controlled by the and many other medias which have not direct ownership of the state, but controlled by the oligarchs, controlled by the or not oligarchs, but Putin's friends, controlled by him and loyal to him, were owning this. Almost all even independent media as well in Russia. But so it's one trend. Then the second trend, state bureaucracy regaining control over the media. The second is the direction towards the protests of 2011 and 12, when many independent, not influential, independent and quality newspapers were either put under control, like Kommersant, who fell one of the first victims of this process. But many were closed, like some news portals were closed, like Большой Город was closed, and like a newspaper, and editor-in-chief was just fired, and so on. And third, I would say it's just war. Just this mobilization during the conflict in Ukraine. We can just compare it towards war with Georgia in 2008, but then it was, mobilization, unifying agenda on almost all media controlled by the state. But then it was maybe for several weeks. Now it's almost 1 year already, starting with Euromaidan in Ukraine, and everything changed. The news agenda changed. Almost everything about Ukraine. One topic dominates. They were more emotional. They became just longer, and so on. And in our polls, we see it as in 2012-13. We have, if we look at the news agenda that people have in their minds. We asked about the most important events of the month, every month. And before Crimea, before war in Ukraine, we had pretty much the agenda was, and the top events were pretty much like in any country. Some marriages of pop stars, like some hurricanes, some others, and some deaths, and so on. Like just mixture of very light topics. But since February last year, we saw that Ukraine became top. Events in Ukraine became top events. 7 to 8 out of 10 most important events were about Ukraine. Just in Russia, in the context when people just listening and watching it, but at the same time feeling very detached from what's going on there. Yeah, and again, there were several occasions when it seemed that it can somehow end this. Like when there were killings in Paris. First day, the news, news programs on TV was just about anywhere in the West, like the tragedy and so on. But already the next day it was channeled to the topics like this. Journalists, they were offending traditional values and so on, and all this talk about the West, which is has they saw gay rights and so on and so forth. So it turned towards this traditional, so-called traditional values. And I would say to understand this, why it's happening, you just have to look at the rating of Vladimir Putin, which is approval, disapproval, and we measure it every month since 1999, when he first became Prime Minister. Here and then President, you see here that and you should not see it as just the rating of Vladimir Putin, but I would say the overall legitimacy of the regime. And here, this is the 88% of approval in just when a war with Georgia happened, and here is the Crimea, annexation of Crimea here. And you see that in this period, it's Putin and the regime lost 1/3 of its supporters, and nothing, not presidential elections. You see, presidential election here, very big mobilization during it. Here, again, very big mobilization here. No mobilization at all. Here's Olympics, only a couple of 4-5%. So no positive event was breaking this trend, which was going down. And here, in these 2 points, there is when there was 60% up around 60, we had these protests. 2005, 2011, mass protests, not just local protests, because there are a lot of them even now. But the regime was obviously in crisis and had to reinvent itself, and it reinvented itself first through Crimea, but now through the conflict with the West. Well, I can speak about later. And so there were underlying support of this decision, and government acted into it. As they acted into these food sanctions, it was just exactly, it was food sanction and not other sanctions, because everybody will say that's you should eat Russian food because it's healthy, it's ecological, genetically modified and so on, stuff and so on. But the majority would prefer at the same time to buy Western gadgets, and half 50-50 would prefer clothes from the West and clothes from the Russian end. But everybody would like to. So government again played into these expectations, and at the same time they played into this huge trauma of the Soviet Union, collapse of the Soviet Union. And again, we had some polling a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, that were asking about what do you think, what could be the idea that can unite people in Russia. And gave the list of several, 6 or 5, and only one got just absolute was approved by absolute majority. It was the idea of Russia as a great power. So it's just it's not only negative mobilization against West, against enemy, because you must understand that the whole conflict is looked upon that it's not between Russia and Ukraine. Only 25% here think that Russia and Ukraine are at war, and in Ukraine, for example, 70% think that Russia and Ukraine are at war. Yes, it's more about that it is the West, through Ukrainians, just try to influence Russia and so on. Yeah, and that from the very beginning, the Euromaidan was seen through the state-run TV channels as a project of the West. That the main reason people were gathering in Maidan Square, it was just the West inspired them and paid them, not because they were just offended by corruption, just pervasive corruption of the Yanukovych regime, or they were reacting to the riot police hitting those people. No. Though just only several years ago, people in Russia were rather, I would say, correctly, understanding the motives of people in Bolotny Square and Sakharov Avenue. But it changed very rapidly when the Kremlin regained the initiative and discredited through this, controlling the independent media, pressure on independent media, pressure on NGOs, on different groups mixed in this protest. I mean, LGBT, for example. There was anti-NGO campaign, and which is also this foreign agent law. Well, there's a list, I would say, of 20 or 30 organizations considered to be foreign agent on this list. Sakharov Foundation among them, for example, Golos Initiative among them, and obviously many others. So this pressure to suppress this alternative, and I would say the direction towards the Ukraine. First reaction was just to suppress another alternative very similar to one that Russia was experiencing just recently in 2011 and 12. And then, of course, it was the chance to have Crimea back, to reinvent the regime, and to legitimize itself through the conflict with the West and through the making Russia great power in the eyes of many people. And it's just the case on the focus group in this very room. People are saying, well, Putin was previously only talking about making Russia as a great country, but now he proved it, and that we showed our teeth and we defended our country because the West wanted to dissect the country just to, why? And again, that does not, all these news programs, they do not provide many rationale behind all these, what is happening. That though 90% are watching TV almost every day, news on TV every day, only less than 20% say they can understand what's going on in the world and in Russia. They do not provide, do not explain, do not provide rational explanations, and that's why these conspiracy theories are so popular. And if you ask, why do you think United States want to conquer Russia and dissect it into just regions? Well, nobody can answer why. Just they know. Attitudes towards the government. This is the well-being of the family. This is expectations. And this is the relation of the current position of the country, economy, situation in economy, in politics, and so on. So here, the two points. Here is economic crisis 2008. There is economic crisis at the end of last year, going down. And here you see that the mobilization, this negative mobilization, but also this support rally behind the flag and so on. It means that it doesn't matter whether people now it does not matter whether people are wealthy or poor. They are much supportive of Putin right now. So it's almost no differentiation here. Because the figures are so high. But if you look here, somewhere in 2011, we have this gap between that people who are the gap between the evolution of their own position and the evolution of the attitudes towards the state, towards Putin and the government. And here was this gap growing. And here, that of course critical of Putin are always people who have nothing to lose, the most poor people. but I mean during his staying at power as president, poverty reduced just because economic growth happened and so on. Yeah, but in this time when there was some differentiation, when 1/3 were critical towards Putin and the regime. So there we saw some differentiation in this period, and it's were people in big cities like Moscow, like St. Petersburg, not wealthy, but it's not that they were wealthy. It's more that they had this access towards different sources of information, that they were thinking not about money but something else, and so on. That they were more critical of the regime, but again, still high numbers of them were supportive of Putin anyway. But so we have wait now. We don't know how it will, how long will last this extraordinary mobilization. What was Georgia here? This is the government and Putin. If you look at Putin, it's flat now. Mm-hmm. So, and this is this conflict and how state media work, that holding it flat. But you see that all other attitudes are going down already quite considerably. That means that in spring or something, the rating of Putin, and the regime will go down as well. But now, for some time, we have this Teflon effect, as Putin as a kind of an author of this, architect of this. Russia regaining its greatness in the eyes of the majority, somehow it's working. Yeah, it's like this, I think.